Greetings, friends, and welcome to episode number 4 of Nostalgia Talk. I'm James, and if you're bored waiting for the election results, this is probably the place to be. So, today I have with me Tim Gosley. Good afternoon, Tim.
Hello, I don't think I'm as exciting as the election results, but it's thanks for asking me to be here.
You're very welcome. Tim is a puppeteer who has worked on the Canadian Sesame Street, otherwise more popularly known as Sesame Park. He was on Fraggle Rock, Iris the Happy Professor. He's done a lot of theater puppet shows, and he's a very talented guy, and we're very happy to have him here today. Well, I'm very happy. It's just me and you, man.
The current times.
Yeah. Just for anyone wondering, Tim and I are not in the same room. He's in Victoria, BC. I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia. He lives on the western side of Canada. I live on the eastern side of Canada. So we're recording from different rooms.
Bookends.
Yeah.
We're the bookends of the country.
Yeah, that is a great way to put it. That is a great way to put it. Okay, let's get right down into it. How did you first get interested in puppets?
I was at Acting University in Alberta. I was kind of a shy actor, and I found that I didn't act well for good directors. I acted well for bad directors, and I was getting kind of freaked out about my future. Simultaneously, two of my fellow actors got involved with puppets, and I think for a shy actor and somebody who wants to take over the world at the same time, puppetry is something that you can create your own universes and stuff. There was also, at that time, this is kind of the early 70s, there was some really interesting artistic puppetry going on in Ottawa through a fellow who became a mentor named Felix Merritt, which most people won't have heard of, but he was very influential in sort of the live theater, Canadian theater history. For me, I live a split life. I have my television career, and then I have all the other things I do. Yeah. Does that answer how I got into it? It was a series of events that, after getting interested, fortunately, I was able to score a job in Edmonton with a group called Patchwork Puppets. And
oh, cool.
Fortunately, yeah, and they actually were trained in puppetry techniques. It's still hard to find people that know puppet techniques. And that led to me going, well, there's not a lot happening in Edmonton, so I'll pack my bags and go to Toronto, which just the timing was good because that's when the Muppets auditioned for Fraggle Rock. So my first TV gig was on Fraggle Rock, and I thought all shows were like this. I don't know. So I was very fortunate to sort of fall into a couple of series of events that was great for me.
Okay. So, were you into the Muppets and Sesame Street before coming into Fraggle Rock?
Yeah, my dad, I sort of have a picture of him somewhere. My dad was into British Music Hall. He ran a show here for over 30 years that basically is British Music Hall, which is really close to vaudeville, which sort of the Muppet Show was based on vaudeville.
Right.
So, my father would dress up as Queen Victoria and sing weird songs and stuff. So actually the Muppet realm was kind of bred into me through my father.
Okay.
So I think I understood the groove. And I was, when I was a little boy, there was this show called Sullivan, and the Muppets would do these huge full stage productions with giant puppets, little tiny puppets, and man, that was exciting to watch. So it was kind of miraculous that you watched that as a kid in Victoria and end up working with the dude that created it in Toronto, I don't know, 20 years later.
It's funny that you mentioned Ed Sullivan and the Muppets. I've been watching a lot of their skits lately. They have a lot of really funny, because that was really, Jim Henson started with Sam and Friends, but that was like just a bunch of skits, and then it went from a bunch of skits on network television to a bunch of skits on a primetime TV series with a bunch of other people. I know that the Beatles and Buddy Holly were on that show a lot.
Yeah, no, that was the show that, like, when we were more together as a society, the whole of Canada and the U.S. would sit down and watch the Ed Sullivan show on Sunday night. There was also a cowboy show called Bonanza that we would all watch.
Oh yeah, I've seen a bit of Bonanza. My dad is really into Western.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think it was Bonanza first, and then the Ed Sullivan show. I could be wrong. Somebody will correct me.
Yeah. Somebody leave a comment below, and we'll figure it out. So you auditioned for Fraggle Rock and got a couple of roles. You got was it Brule the Minstrel? I think was that character's name.
Yeah, I think that was the most reoccurring thing. I kind of treated Fraggle Rock as getting an MA at university. Like, I did get a BFA for acting, and then you get hired on Fraggle Rock, and at first you kind of think everybody's going to get a lead role, all the Canadians and stuff, but they actually used all the main puppeteers from the Muppet Show, which sort of makes sense. And when we first, we were trained by this guy named Richard Hunt, and who I'm trying to think of, he was Beaker, and I'll just forget but he played some major characters.
Forgetful Jones. Speaking of forgetting what characters he played, he was Forgetful Jones on Sesame Street.
I will take over the role. I'm not that up on sort of Muppet history. I like to do these things. I'm not sort of a historian on these things. Anyways, we were trained, and we thought, well, gosh, that's kind of rude that they don't want us to play the leads and stuff. And then the leads came into town, and we sort of sat there and watched their puppetry and realized that while we were very good puppeteers, we were nowhere near as good as these guys. And so we sort of took a big gulp and went, well, I guess we got something to learn here. and then for the next 4 years, basically, I was an extra with getting little roles like Brule and the Poison Cackler, and I think I had a Grandma Fraggle at some point. I think I'm credited with somebody that I didn't play actually on the Muppet Wiki, but I haven't corrected them. And then where the payoff came was when I got the Canadian Sesame Street role, and then I actually got to practice what I had learned for 4 years.
Nice. So what was Jim Henson like? I was talking to Mike Peterson and Kevin Carlson on this show about Jim Henson, and I've talked to a bunch of other people about Jim Henson as well. What was he like to you?
Well, he was a lovely guy. I'm kind of shy, and he was Jim Henson, so he was infinitely approachable, and you could talk to him, and I did talk to him, but I didn't talk to him too much because I was just intimidated by the wonder of the guy. He was also fairly big, so he was a big dude. But what was really interesting, he was just so inquisitive, so he was always asking questions.
Nice.
I remember being at a reception, and I don't know how it came up, but on the West Coast we have an expression about going snake, which is kind of to go crazy. And so he heard me say this, and he wanted a dictionary definition of what going snake meant. And it's just like everything he saw sort of perked his interest, and I think it perked his imagination, so he was always sort of creating, and he was just a very lovely guy, and considering the amount of stuff that was on his shoulder, very light and jovial.
Right. Right.
you could see that at that time, part of the reason that Fraggle Rock was made was it was an experiment to see if there could be a show that Mr. Henson didn't have to be in the room 24/7. So he was there for part of it. He would direct, sometimes he played some characters, and then he would go off and he'd be flying around the world and
right.
Arranging Labyrinth and all the other things that were going on around that time. And when he would come back to Toronto and be in the studio, you could see that this guy was really, I don't know, tired, but he was traveling a lot. Like,
he was a busy man.
Totally natural for the human body to go through. Yeah, I feel extremely fortunate to have been in my small way, just close, and to see him work in a studio, to see him direct. As Brule, the bass player, he was Cantus, the flute player, so he was,
right.
We weren't even properly socially distanced for that stuff. So, I don't think I fully appreciated it at the time because it was my first gig.
Yeah, socially distanced. Yeah, welcome to 2020.
Yeah, I don't know how you puppeteer now, because, we were all in each other's armpits underneath each other like this. There's a lot of, it's like an iceberg, so there's the puppet on top, and then there's all this human flesh underneath.
Right.
So, yeah, you would have to be in hazmat suits or something to do it right now.
You could probably, I know that puppeteers work with a microphone, so that way the lines can get recorded. I think you could find a way to get a microphone in a hazmat suit.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting then, speaking about microphones, is during Fraggle Rock, all the microphones were corded. So, things like wireless microphones and small video cameras didn't exist then. So when you had 13 to 16 puppeteers running around a stage, 6 of them having microphone cords hanging out their butts, you were like, it was a whole different negotiation to get from point A to point B. And now, you put these fabulous things on and you can walk around and be in the next room or be in the washroom and, be able to speak to people and stuff. So the technology change it kind of makes me feel old. It's sort of like,
Jeez.
Horse and buggies to cars and stuff.
I remember I go to film school at NSCC, which is something I've talked about on this show before. We were doing a student film once, and I was the sound recordist, and we had to hook up a lavalier microphone to one of our actors, and I had headphones plugged into a mixer so that way, because they were shooting from a little bit farther from where he was sitting, so if I held a boom over him, it would get noticed. So.
Yeah, right.
So we hooked the lav up to him, and we did that for a couple of actors, and we were trying to do some sound tests, and our actor took the lavalier off, and I could hear into my headphone, "Psst, James," and I was like, "Wait, what?" And I totally forgot that we had a microphone on. He's like, "Can you hear me?" And I was like, "Is there ghosts in here?" I looked behind myself, and there was our actor. I totally forgot that we had done that. Gave me quite a fright, I will say.
Yeah. I got an award on a TV show in Denmark for ruining the most sound equipment. I separated one of those little microphone heads from the cord, and I guess it was like a $6,000 microphone, and I got this cheap little plastic award for it. So,
jeez,
be destructive, and you'll get rewarded for it. Shouldn't say that, especially with what's going on down in the States.
Yeah. So you also got to puppeteer. You weren't credited in it, but I had read that you puppeteered in the Muppets 30th anniversary special. First of all, did you puppeteer in that?
Yeah, there was 3 or 4 specials around that time, and I definitely was in that one. I can't quite remember the other two, the thing that I am credited in, which might be getting out of order, but is Follow That Bird.
Right.
And that's, in terms of outside of Fraggle, that was kind of the biggest Muppet participation. Things like the 30th anniversary, basically, I mean, it's very exciting, but they have racks of puppets, and they go, say, grab a couple puppets, go grab a couple puppets.
A lot of regular Muppet characters just kind of showed up in the background, so that explains it, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, they needed puppeteers and things, and the Muppets at that period really enjoyed working in Toronto because I think it was Emmett Otter was one of their first projects they did there with the CBC, and they knew that the crew was very competent. So I think it spoke well of Canadian talent, and then I am sure that there was some kind of financial incentive, which all TV and movie companies take advantage of when they negotiate where to go. And the thing for Fraggle Rock was after these guys, the main American Muppeteers that worked in England for however long that was, it was a long haul for them to go back and forth. Like, their homes were still in the States, so to come to Toronto when they wanted to go home, and you, like, people were traveling like there was no tomorrow in those days. It's sort of changed recently. But it's hard on you to do that. So I think part of it was just kind of for their own sanity. But also because the CBC had just really great crews that they like to work with.
Nice. So when you did the 30th anniversary special, it was celebrating such a wonderful legacy, really. Like, how did you feel that you got to be a part of such a wonderful celebration of such an iconic franchise?
Well, I think you're looking at it from a distance. I went, oh, great, a gig. I get to play with my friends.
That's the
what
best
do
part.
After the shoot? This is where I can't remember how old I was when I started it, but you just got used to the fact that these little perks would happen. So you're working on Fraggle Rock, and then they say there's a special coming to town, and you go, oh boy, I hope I get onto that. But because you're trained by Richard Hunt that you will probably get on it. You may not do anything terribly thrilling on it, but you'll be part of it, and you'll be part of the energy, and it's a lot of fun. And I think on one of those specials, it was Jim Henson's birthday. And
oh, wow.
I think he came in the next morning a little slow after his birthday celebrations and stuff. So, yeah, I think that was the 30th anniversary.
Two birthdays in one day.
Yeah. I mean, it was also like going into a room and seeing sort of a line of Kermit puppets, ready to be used. There's no life like it. And I'm like, I am a bit of an odd duck, so I'm not like a huge fan where I follow all these people around and stuff. I'm in awe of people that do amazing things and stuff. But
that's great.
Still, to see these iconic puppets and to see the people that made them and the care that went into it. I mean, there was so much care that goes into their shows that I've worked with people who are trying to replicate it, but often you don't have the resources, and most of the people that were good at it were people that were somehow connected to Fraggle you'll quickly find out that they don't. And you go, well, the chances are, I want the job, so I'm not saying. But it was usually people that hired Muppet trained people that got the detail right to make a good quality show, or if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does. So one project that you were talking about earlier, I had ready for this. It's one of my favorite Sesame Street productions. Follow That Bird. I've always loved that film. That actually came out 14 years before I was even born, so I never got to see it in the theater. I actually was born about 7 to 8 months before the second Sesame Street film, Elmo and Grouchland, came out, but that's another project. Can you talk a little bit about Follow That Bird, where you got to be Oscar's car horn / honker?
I
got a honker in the bag because my horn's broken.
Yeah, no, I just actually made a demo reel and put that on it because that was so much fun. I mean,
I bet.
We had done enough of Fraggle that we sort of knew our chops. But again, I mean, all the people from Sesame Street move into just north of Toronto, and it's intimidating as heck to see these guys. I mean, they're all relaxed as it can be, and you can talk to them and things, but they're famous dudes. It was a lot of fun. I remember this is sort of a weird angle on it, but there was two black actors, the famous Sesame Street black.
I think I do know who you are referring to. And for the viewers out there who don't, if I'm sorry.
Sonia, I'm trying. What's her stage? Her real name is Sonia.
Sonia Manzano, who plays Maria.
Thank you so much. And the guy, I think he's left the show at some point.
Are you referring to Roscoe Orman, who plays Gordon?
Yes, boy.
Okay.
See, you're way better at this. Anyways, they were really concerned because the cinematographer and director didn't know how to film black actors.
Oh,
because
wow.
The filters and stuff are different for the skin, so they would get really pissed off because they weren't looking good on the screen because people didn't really consider the technique and the difference of things, which I think is sort of interesting because the whole nature of filming and our awareness of our cultural different folks, that it does get affected by the technique and everything that we do. And at that time, which was whenever the heck it was, early 80s I think it was sort of mid 80s, they just did not have the awareness that other people that were not white, and yet all the puppets are all these different colors, so they were probably liking those guys really well. Anyways, that's just an odd thing I remember from the show. But I was in this car, the car that you saw the honking in.
Right.
That was so cool because they had built it so that our bodies were able to submerge under the front, like I was in the back seat.
I was just about to ask you, how uncomfortable was that?
Well, it was, but I was young, and I'm down there with Marty Robinson, who is Telly Monster, and he's a really tall dude, and we're crammed in this thing, but I don't know, and the car itself was really funky, so I found that sort of stuff just really exciting to be part of, and generally when we're doing TV or film, we have to look in a monitor as we're working, otherwise we have no idea where our eye focus is. And at that time, we were just given these little dinky monitors, and I'm sort of going, holy crap, how can I do a good job looking into this thing? And now, I mean, everybody's looking into their cell phones anyways, so, get used to it, I guess. Yeah, that was great. I'm trying to think of other things that happened on Follow That Bird. Well, there was Big Bird. To see Big Bird for the first time was really great, and I'd go and collect the turkey feathers because he'd kind of shed his feathers, so I'd sort of collect them and bring them home to my dad to show him that I got a job.
Do you still have them?
I think the thing with these turkey feathers is over time they would bleach out.
Oh.
So they didn't look too happy, but I think I gave my last one to my father, and he gave it away to a child, which sort of
that's kind of
upset
sweet.
me, but the child was happy. So.
Yeah. Hey, this is one of Big Bird's feathers. I bet that kid was I bet that kid probably didn't even believe it.
So that it was wonderful, and working in a movie is really different than working in television. So there was discovering the difference, and I think ultimately, what's neat with television is that you're in usually for a puppet show, you're in a fairly controlled environment that's stable from day to day.
Right.
And with movies, you're totally like you're going to each different location, and it's a different setup. And I found in my experience that the television guys were more like a family, where there was a cool factor on making a film that people were friendly and stuff, but you had to work on your cool way more than in TV. So that was kind of interesting.
Nice. So Follow That Bird was your first film then, I guess.
Yeah, well, not quite. I made a quirky little. It wasn't a Muppet style show, but I had made a film about not labeling people, called Buttonville, out of Edmonton.
Oh, okay.
That was actually, and the puppets were very intricately made by a Canadian puppeteer, and they were a little bit like doozers in their construction. In that
nice.
Was underneath, and he had this little stuff. They were really difficult to operate. But yeah, I haven't done a lot of movies through. I actually, I'm not terribly ambitious. More due to shyness than to not wanting to do work. But for most of my career, when there was a puppet gig, because there was sort of this puppet family, the word just kind of went out through the family, and you'd go and do your auditions, and then whoever got it would get it. So I never really went for getting agents and trying to get on. There's actually puppetry work on things like horror shows and stuff where there's robots and stuff, and I mean, if somebody gave it to me, I would have done it, but I just didn't have a great need to go into that realm, I guess.
Okay. So, on the topic of Sesame Street, you performed Basil the Bear on the Canadian Sesame Street. How did Basil come about as a character and for you to get that role?
Yeah, so right towards, this was, I think it was in the 4th year of Fraggle. Sesame Street has all these little satellites around the world of Sesame Street in Israel and Portugal and Mexico, and Canada's always been a little tougher because we're right next to the States, where you have Kermit and Oscar the Grouch and all these guys. So there had been Canadian segments that were put into the CBC segment, or the knew that they had a talent pool that they could add some Canadian puppets. So they decided to add 3 Canadian puppets to start off with, and the puppets were made in New York, in the workshop in New York.
Okay, cool.
And then they were brought up, and we auditioned, and for some reason, all I remember of my audition is I think I had a afternoon puppet show at the Ontario Puppetry Association, so I had a little one-man puppet show called The Ugly Duckling that I would do, and the auditions were in the morning, and I kind of went to the auditions, and I couldn't imagine that I would get it, so I was probably pretty relaxed. Like if you really want something, often that isn't the best thing in an audition. It sort of depends on your personality. Anyway, so I actually don't remember what I did, but I think I was probably pretty close to myself with a bear sort of sounding voice, and I got the role, which was really lovely. And it also it affirmed that sort of working on Fraggle Rock for 4 years, sort of behind the scenes, actually had paid off. And we did get to do a special on that where Elmo was a special guest star.
I was just about to talk about that, yeah.
Okay, so I'll let you lead up to that.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, Basil Hears a Noise. I've seen that special a few times. I absolutely love it. And as you said, Elmo was on that. So Kevin Clash was, performing Elmo from the American Sesame Street onto the something maybe not on the actual show, but on something related to the Canadian Sesame Street. So first off, can you talk a little bit about what it was like having Kevin performing Elmo on it?
Yeah, well, at that time, like Kevin Clash had been on Follow That Bird, so I had met him before. And Elmo, on the time that we did Basil Hears a Noise, he was on his rise up, but he wasn't Elmo yet. He was sort of 75% Elmo in terms of people's perception. Again, I get pretty intimidated by other people, so I didn't talk too much to Kevin. My buddies, Rob Mills and Pierre Paquette, I think they were sort of more chummy with him. I was sort of focused. This was my first really big thing to guide, artistically. So I was really concentrating on being as Basil as I could be. So I was probably a little better behaved than when I was an extra, and you can sort of goof around and make stupid comments and all the other things you do. But suddenly, when you got to do it, there's a responsibility that you want to meet. But that was I was very happy to do that, and we were hoping there would be a series of these shows because it did well. I think it won 2 ACE Awards.
Oh, nice.
Or it was nominated. I don't really remember, but it did well, and it did well down in the States to a degree.
Wow.
We thought that they would let us make more, but getting TV shows done in any way, there's all this negotiation and all. And then what was kind of fun was it was first packaged in VHS as Basil Hears a Noise, and there's a picture of all of us in our little knight's outfits and stuff. And then Elmo gets to 100% Elmo, and he's like, the new Kermit or whatever.
Pretty much, yeah. He's the because Kermit the Frog is now that Muppets franchise is now owned by Disney. I guess it is safe to say that Elmo is the Kermit of Sesame Street.
Yeah. So what they repackaged the VHS, and suddenly it was Elmo in Basil Hears a Noise. there's Basil with Elmo over his shoulder and stuff. So it's kind of neat. And then another Elmo story with Follow That Bird. That when they did the 20th anniversary CD packaging, they redid the artwork, and Elmo's on it. Elmo isn't in Follow That Bird.
I think he had a little cameo right toward the end of it.
Really?
Yeah, there was a scene right at the very end when Big Bird arrives and all these Muppets come to greet him.
Oh.
There were a lot of very minor background Muppet characters who were on Sesame Street at the time, and even a few that Kevin was brand new to. Ferlinghetti, Don and Zeddy, Dr. Nobel Price, and I think Richard Hunt was doing Elmo at the time, and even though Elmo was just in the background, like he didn't have a conversation with anyone, it's in the scene where Miss Finch comes by and basically says to Big Bird, okay, maybe the Dodos weren't so good, but I've arranged another family, and everyone just says to Miss Finch, this is where he lives, we're his family, we may not all be birds, but we have lots of people, and we don't want him to leave. And Maria looks at everyone, she's like, right? And you can hear Elmo going, no.
Wow, well, thank you for that, because, maybe I didn't see the end of the film. I did see the end of the film, but I certainly don't remember that.
That's
so
okay.
That's pretty interesting, though.
Yeah.
So that does allow them to put him on the cover.
Yeah, I can imagine that when that once Elmo was included in the cover, Elmo in Basil Hears a Noise, people are like, oh, screw Basil, it's Elmo!
Yeah.
I was born when Elmo's World started, so there's my main foray into it for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really interesting how the different characters kind of sum up people's childhoods. I mean, there's something about Kermit that I, still love, and when Stevie Whitmire took him over, I thought he did a fabulous job, but for me, the puppets, changing the voices or changing the humans under the puppet does have a feel usually. So I really liked Jim's Kermit. And
have you seen Matt Vogel's Kermit?
I don't think I have. What do you think of?
Well, no disrespect to Steve. Steve, if you are watching this, you were the Kermit that I grew up with. So I basically, have been familiar with your. I don't want to say voice because you're not the voice actor of Kermit. You were the puppeteer. So I grew up with your performance and voice of Kermit. But Matt's pretty good as well. I saw one thing that he did where Kermit basically points to a certain direction. Matt has Kermit point to a certain direction, and I noticed that Jim does that a lot when he does Kermit.
Okay, yeah.
I'll put a little link to Matt's Kermit in the corner of the video.
Oh, okay, nice. When Jim died, and it was handed over, they decided to keep Kermit alive and hand it over to Stevie. It made so much sense because Steven was so dedicated to the Muppets, Jim, and everything. So it made a lot of sense at the time. It's also kind of interesting because, I mean, playing somebody else's character, you get told a lot about how the producers want you to play this character.
Right.
So Stevie wasn't totally just doing how he would do it. He was doing it taking into account of the notes of his bosses, which is part of your job.
Right.
Yes, sir.
So going back to Basil Hears a Noise, there was a scene that I wanted to ask you about. It was in the very opening. It's Basil, Dodie, Louie, and Elmo sleeping in a tent, and boy, did I love the look of that scene. How did you do that?
Well, I mean, this is where this is the CBC art crew. That was done. I think it was done by a designer I went to university with it actually.
Oh wow!
And something like that was. Well, I guess you're seeing the ground, but you're in sleeping bags, so it's quite easy to construct that. I think most of that scene is in the lighting.
Okay.
Like, because basically you've got a tent, and then you've got to hide your puppeteer dudes.
So you were basically underneath it?
Yeah, so often with something like that, your floor, well, most of the time, your floor is off the ground. Puppeteers are under the floor. I think for that one, because they did they came in, like you saw the surroundings and things, I think the floor was pretty low, so we were probably in chairs as opposed to standing up under there. I see what you're saying about it being a beautiful shot.
It looks so real.
Yeah, but I would think a lot of that is sort of in the lighting, and the tent probably was real. So the majority of those things could be bought out of a store and stuff. The CBC had a really nice sensitivity towards the Muppet work.
Nice. It's funny, I was talking to Mike Peterson 2 weeks ago about a show he did called The Mighty Jungle, and he was saying that a lot of the sets, and it's like what you were saying about the tent scene in Basil Hears a Noise, a lot of the sets on The Mighty Jungle were like bath mats from Walmart.
Right, yeah, you do what you can. Also, often, the other thing that it was very strange about Fraggle Rock is they had a tremendous budget. We took a week to create a half-hour show, and often we were working till 3 in the morning in the last couple of days and stuff, and that's totally unheard of.
I know how you feel, though.
When that's your first show and you see the one, they had a lot of money, but they also filled all that time trying to make the show the best they can, and a usual show is for a half hour you might get 2 days if you're lucky. A lot of what I've done are 15-minute shows, and often you get an episode and a bit in a day. And so it just puts everything on a different way to look at it. And that doesn't mean that the performance is hurt by that necessarily, but you are having to move things along at a clippity-clop speed, partially because the budgets are so crazy on these shows, and they can't afford to give it a lot of time.
Right.
Mr. Henson was sort of a special case.
I see.
Yeah.
So, moving on from the Muppets and the Muppet productions you were a part of, there's one show I would really like to talk about that is not Muppet related from my childhood that you were a part of, and that is Iris the Happy Professor, where you got to play the piano and the plant. Yeah, the plant. Yeah, for a minute I was like, wait, am I correct in these characters?
Yeah, no, you're correct. Neither of them had any hands, which is kind of really annoying if you're a puppeteer.
So you basically, so occasionally when you did those characters, because they were in the same scenes a lot, did you perform them on both hands?
Yeah, so the piano had a hole in its top, so like it's a stand-up piano.
Okay.
I forget the nickname we had for him. He was pretty demonic. So he had this huge face, and he's here, and the piano was kind of shaped like this, and then there's a hole here where I would have the plant on the other hand, so I would be doing them both at the same time.
Yikes.
and that kind of stuff is, it ruins your back, but it's fun, and you get to try to mind meld two characters at once. Eventually, the piano got to get hands, so sometimes when
I was gonna say, I noticed that the piano had hands, and I was like, well, how did that happen? Was another puppeteer doing the hands or something, or?
Yeah, so you would play around with that, so that sometimes one puppeteer would be doing both hands, or usually a puppeteer wants to do the one hand that he can, which is, so the plant would be here, and then, so you're doing one hand. So like Basil, going back to Basil a bit, he's a live hand puppet. So I would generally do the live hand and have one hand pinned, or I would have a friend do my other hand. Or if it was a musical number, I would often get my crazy friend Rob Mills to do both hands. And so he's doing your hands.
Cool.
And that, well, it is, except that if it's Rob, who's a trickster, he's like doing all kinds of things with your hands that you have absolutely no control over. So he basically at times was controlling my puppet, and my puppet is trying to follow what the heck he's doing, and he's pushing me over here, and he's pushing me over there, and he's doing whatever. So it's generally when you have an assistant puppeteer, they're very sort of polite to the person controlling the head and stuff, and then you have exceptions like Crazy Rob, who would take the world into his own hands and usually created a lot of life into the puppet because you're thinking on the moment to match his craziness. So
Nice.
Go back up. Sorry.
So, just a funny little story about Iris the Happy Professor. Over the summer, I had this friend as a child. Her name is Michaela, and I still talk to her now. We haven't really hung out in a while, but over the summer I ran into her, and I used to watch that show a lot with her when we were kids, and it was very, very nice to reunite with Michaela. I hadn't seen her in, oh God, until then it must have been 10 years, I think. So Michaela, if you are watching, I hope to see you again a bit more often soon, and hopefully reminisce about stuff like that.
Yeah, gotta find new puppet shows to watch. It's great. The other thing that's quite odd, or I found odd about working on TV, is that you don't have an audience. So you don't really know that there's people like you out there watching or liking it, or so it's you're sort of dependent on fan mail or whatever. With Fraggle Rock, because it had such a presence, you knew people were watching it. So it is very sort of heartfelt to hear people go, oh yeah, that was an important show. When I was growing up, as Bonanza was an important show for me when I was growing up.
Nice.
So that what you're doing and your interest in us old nostalgic guys that crawl out from under the rocks is very nice for us, but it's also important for us to sort of know that we did have an impact, or do have an impact, because we're not dead yet.
Yeah, it's funny because just before once I started planning the interview with you, I think it was Fred Stinson who used the term Canadian old timers.
Yeah. Well, I'm using this phrase because I was introduced a couple of months ago as the grandfather of Canadian puppetry. So I now label myself as the grandfather of Canadian puppetry, which I'm sure other grandfathers of Canadian puppetry would take umbrage to, but not too many people want to be labeled like that.
My apologies.
Yeah, no. It's quite all right.
So what are you working on right now with puppeteering?
Well, I just actually did a live stream of a show last week, which I don't know whether the television audience, it was more of an adult show, but it used pretty well every kind of puppet technique that I have extrapolated over my long and aged career. So I have a little Muppet character in it.
Cute.
But I go on to a lot of light projection and shadow, and I have a video camera that's sort of mounted below, so I would operate puppets into the camera, and it's projected for the live audience. But when we did the live stream, it would be sort of it would be streamed directly through what I was doing onto the screen and stuff. So that was pretty great. I'm waiting to hear about a TV series, which one never knows, especially when you're at my age. They probably are concerned of the grandfather croaking on the set. But that would be it would be fun to do another TV show, and there's a organization called Unima Canada, which is an international organization for for international puppeteers, but there's sectors of it in different countries. So I'm sort of helping with the Canadian organization, so that you guys in Halifax through Mermaid, you have a Unima Atlantic organization, and there's one in Quebec, Ontario, and I'm with the West. There's a group called the Old Trout Puppet Company. I don't know if you've heard of them, but
Can't say that I have.
You haven't? You can't? Okay.
I can't say I
They're
have. No.
international. Like, this is where television and live puppetry, they're pretty well completely different worlds. So this Old Trout group is sort of international in stature, but more through the live world than the TV world. So I'm still pretty active and doing stuff. It's just not as high profiled as my early to middle age career was. But I'm very happy with it. So
That's great. Normally, this would be the time where I go in to ask any fan questions. I've asked people, do they have it? Every episode I do this, but and the same with the last one I just did with Ron Doucette. I don't have any fan questions, so we might as well wrap it up. Is there anything you'd like to conclude with?
no, just thanks for having me, and
You're very welcome.
Keep on doing the good work that you're doing.
Thank you very much. I've really, really enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, bless your heart.
Thank you very much, and I've got more nostalgia talk coming soon, hopefully. Actually, I have landed some pretty cool guests that will be out, that I'll be recording with very soon, and I'm looking forward to sharing that. So until then, peace!